Between December 1985 and May 1986, 3 young women were murdered in what appeared to be quite unrelated cases. Only slowly in the months of painstaking detective work that followed did it emerge that one man might be responsible. A serial killer was on the loose. The linking of these cases is an important story. It shows how police inquiries can still depend upon a good hunch, but above all, on help from the public. Using police, forensic scientists, witnesses, and, where necessary, actors, we've reconstructed the crucial stages of the inquiry. The story begins on a Sunday night at the home in Romford in East London of 19-year-old Alison Day.
Thanks, Mum. I better go now because I don't want to keep Paul waiting.
Well, you haven't had your sweet yet.
Oh, I won't have time for sweet. Anyway, I don't want to get fat like you, do I, Dad?
Alison was setting off to visit her boyfriend. She left home at 20 to 6. It was a cold Sunday evening just after Christmas, and the streets were almost deserted. The last part of her journey took Alison on the North London link to Hackney Wick. The train arrived at 7:10. She was now less than 5 minutes from the printers where her boyfriend worked. But Alison never arrived. She simply disappeared.
Of course, each hour of each day was a torture for the parents, the family and the boyfriend, not knowing hour by hour what had happened to her.
Before services are back to normal. Police searching for the missing teenager Alison Day have found the body of a woman. The discovery was made this morning by police frogmen searching the River Lee in Hackney. Police say they're treating the case as a murder, but there are no further details at this stage.
She had been tied up, strangled, brutally raped, and her body disposed of by being thrown into the River Lee. She was found after 14 days, and of course by that time there was virtually no forensic evidence whatsoever. We did, however, find one important clue in the river. Purely by chance, a frogman in a training exercise about 200 yards further up from where she was found her coat under the Eastway Bridge.
Well, let's lose anything. It's heavy. Hold on a minute. Looks like it's weighted as well. Stay on the ladder, mate. Oh, it's very, very heavy. Something inside.
In normal circumstances, that wouldn't be much of a clue. It was a fairly ordinary sheepskin coat, and we didn't expect to gain very much from it.
Yes, there is bricks in the pocket. And another brick in this pocket.
At the police forensic laboratory at Lambeth in South London, it took 2 days to dry out before scientists could inspect it.
Well, the coat was muddy and covered with the remains of small animals from the river. This made taping much more difficult than normal. However, we could see that we were picking up fibres on the tapings, some of which might have come from the attacker. So we knew that if the murderer was caught, there was some possibility that we could match fibres on the tapings with fibres from his clothing. But the chances were very slim.
We had no witnesses who saw Alison on the train or at Hackney Wick Station. All the immediate suspects were very quickly eliminated. Nothing else at all. But we did get one interesting fact from the pathologist who carried out the post-mortem examination.
When I was asked to do the autopsy, I found that this lady who'd had ligature around her neck had also had this ligature tightened with a tourniquet. A branch was used from somewhere nearby. In addition to this, there was also a knot which had been tied into the ligature around the front of her neck in order to tighten the neck even further and to have an effect, therefore, on the voice box. The fact that we had this combination of injuries led us to believe that possibly the person involved may have been someone who knew something about the martial arts, or indeed someone who possibly had been in the armed forces. But of course, at that stage, this was mere speculation.
Three months later, and 30 miles away from Alison's murder, one Thursday afternoon, a Dutch schoolgirl, Maartje Tamboezer, left her home to buy sweets in the nearby village. She took a short cut along a cinder path that ran along the railway line.
It was probably the worst killing I'd ever seen in my career. She had been savagely raped, subjected to brutal head injuries and strangled. The murderer tried to destroy the body by burning, and it was so horrendous that everybody was absolutely devastated and upset by what they saw. I was of the view that there was no way that we could ever give up in attempting to catch this man, and I actually said at the time that if it cost £2 million, we would still have to find him. It was that important to me and everybody else on the team.
Right, I'm going to pick these up now then, Jamie.
Right, Peter, I'll get them off.
Right, first of all, the tissue. It's FC21.
Tissue FC21.
Yeah,
Now the matches, 2 matches. FC22.
FC22, the matches.
During the course of the examination at the scene, it became clear to me that we were searching for somebody who had deliberately endeavoured to destroy evidence. Here, there was a clear attempt to actually destroy the body and also destroy various parts of the body with a view to preventing any police officers or scientists obtaining forensic evidence, which of course gave us an indication that we may be looking for somebody who had experience or had committed a crime of a similar nature before and was aware of what the police were interested and would be looking for.
A major incident room was set up at Guildford Police Station.
Have you seen this statement here?
Over 120 policemen and women were drafted in to begin Surrey's largest ever murder investigation.
Look at every single inquiry very thoroughly indeed. This is a most serious and horrendous murder which we must detect. And I want you all to look at every item and snippets of it. The other thing is that I must repeat again that we must put everything into the incident room. If we do not, the inquiry falls down. If you store action yourself, we don't know about it and we can't use that information.
Yes, I did see somebody here yesterday over the other side of those trees, standing in a ploughed field, and I noticed him because he didn't have a dog with him.
Could you tell me what he's wearing, please?
Yes, he had a blue parka on, and he was standing in the middle of the
station. I see this line across the path. It was tied there and on this rail. When I looked, there were fewer knots on this side.
Yeah.
So I took the easy way out, untied that side, lifted it across and poked it through the wire and then continued to the station.
As a result of one of the witnesses coming forward the other day, who found the fishing line at the point where we think the confrontation took place on the footpath, we must now be very conscious of anybody we're talking to who's involved in fishing or has got a skimmer.
Well, first of all, we felt the crime was local. It had every indications of being a local man, and we were would have been surprised if it wasn't local. But then, with this colossal amount of information coming in, we began to realise that we would have to perhaps look elsewhere. And I can indicate that by there were many people who cited a man leaving the village of East Horsley and running across the footbridge to the train, which was the 6:07 train, that evening, and clearly taking the man out of the locality. As a result of that and the amount of work and information we had, we actually tried to trace every single person on that train. That included searching through 2 million railway tickets.
They found dozens of tickets that could have been the killers, but no fingerprints that matched with criminal records. Then came a breakthrough from the forensic laboratory. From semen stains left on Maartje Tamboezer's clothing, scientists were able to determine the murderer's blood group.
We could tell that her killer was Group A. In fact, he was an A secretor, which simply means that there are some blood group substances in his semen and his other body fluids.
1 person in every 3 has an A secretor blood group. But another, more discriminating test narrows down the possibilities still further. By measuring an enzyme in the blood called PGM, scientists can divide people into 10 distinct categories.
We could tell that her killer was either group PGM1+, group PGM2+1+, or PGM1+1-. Taken together, this means that the police could eliminate 4 out of every 5 potential suspects by the blood grouping alone.
There was a second crucial piece of expert evidence. Maartje Tamboezer's killer had tied her hands with a short piece of string. It was a rare brand made from paper. It's called som yarn, and inquiries revealed that a factory in Preston was the only manufacturer.
The thickness of the paper that the string's made from, between 80 and 90 microns. Now, that's very interesting, actually. It tells me that it's made from Proviforce paper, which we haven't used since 1982. So it's quite an old piece of string that you've got here. The width of the strip of paper, between 17 and 18 millimetres. Now, that's unusual, too. That means it must have been made from an edge strip.
And what does that mean?
An edge strip are the 2 edge pieces as the paper's being cut, and they're always slightly over or slightly undersized, slightly non-standard, in fact. So a combination of the unusual width of strip, the non-standard width of strip, and the age of the paper that's been used means that it's a very, very unusual piece of string that you've got here, probably unique.
Increasingly concerned for the safety of a newlywed woman. Anne Locke, who's been married for just 4 weeks, was last seen on Sunday evening.
A normal route home is from Waterloo on the tube to Finsbury Park, where she catches a British Rail train to Brookmans. But as time passes, concern for the safety of Mr Locke's bride of 4 weeks grows.
The woman is Anne Locke, a 29-year-old secretary at London Weekend Television. She was last seen leaving the London Weekend
It's always a worry for every senior investigator that maybe the man that you are hunting has struck again. And there were so many striking similarities in relation to Anne Locke being missing in relation to the inquiry I was investigating that I was very concerned. So concerned that I rang the incident room in Hertfordshire and said, look, I think we better have a chat because there's too many similarities that worry me.
They came down to Surrey and we took them out and showed them the scene of our particular murder, and they were very worried that it could be the work of the same person. But of course, until Anne Locke's body was found, no one could be certain.
Well, about this time, I appealed to Crimewatch UK for help, and as a result of that programme, a lot of very interesting information came forward. But what was very crucial was that a police officer investigating the murder of Alison Day contacted my boss, Vincent McFadden, with very important and vital information.
I asked him how his victim had died, and he said she had been banged on the head 3 or 4 times. He asked me how ours had been killed, and I said, well, she's been strangled with a ligature. But the strange part, and we've never let this out to anybody, is a tourniquet. And he said, well, how do you mean a tourniquet? And I said, well, a piece of wood put in through the knot in the neck and twisted. And I can hear the silence now.
The penny dropped that a piece of wood that was leaning against the body of Maartje Tamboezer, instead of being used as an accelerant to burn the body, as I first thought, clearly was part of a tourniquet.
We then called the pathologist to a conference, and Dr. Venices was able to examine Maartje Tamboezer. Her body was still available, and it was his opinion that the two girls had in fact been murdered by the same person.
Later that month, another link emerged, this time from records of an inquiry called Operation Heart. There'd been a rape close to West Hampstead railway station, where the attacker had used similar techniques.
The links between these two offences were that the hands had been tied, clothing had been cut, and the blood group of the rapist was exactly the same as the murderer. And of course it was part of the Operation Heart series. And we then knew that we were looking for a multiple rapist and murderer.
In fact, Operation Heart had been looking for a pair of rapists, who together had been attacking women mainly in the Camden Town area of North London. By 1985, detectives had linked 27 cases. But after a year without success, the inquiry was on the point of closing down. But Operation Heart had amassed a lot of information about the rapists.
Well, we knew that one was a tall man and one was a short man. We didn't know a great deal about the tall man, but the shorter one was an A secretor blood group, and from witnesses we were told he had fair hair. He'd also given the witnesses information about being in prison and in prison hostels, but we thought a lot of that was deliberate lies to put us off the scent. We also knew that this man often worked alone, and he had a very distinctive methods in the way that he operated. He would always carry a knife, he would engage the girls in conversation before he attacked them, and he would steal property from them on occasions, and he would often attack girls near deserted railway stations. We next set up an index of all known suspects with an A secretor blood group, and we nominated this the Z-men, and it was in this index we expected to find the shorter man, and it was just a matter of weeding him out from those.
Detective Chief Superintendent Vincent McFadden, head of Surrey's CID, now assumed a central role. If the two murders were linked together with the London rapes, then the separate inquiries had to be coordinated. Accordingly, Charlie Farquhar, hunting Alison Day's killer, John Hurst seeking Maartje Tamboezer's killer, and Ken Worker looking for the London rapists, linked their computers to form one of the largest police inquiries in British criminal history.
All the senior investigating officers were sure that we were looking for a person with a history of sexual offences. In other words, he had a criminal record. That led us to send teams of detectives to trace and interview these sex offenders. And what we would be looking for, of course, would be som yarn, nylon cord, matches, and of course we would require, if we didn't know their blood group, both blood and saliva. In addition, we would closely check their alibis for the relevant dates of these offences.
The 17th of April and the 29th of December? Yes. I can't remember. Do you know your blood group? Well, I think it's O. Well, last time I went to the doctor, he said it was O. Would you mind coming down to the police station and to give us a specimen of your blood?
From the Surrey Constabulary. This is my colleague, Detective Sergeant Buchanan. We're making inquiries in relation to an offence of murder that occurred on the 17th of April 1986, and I believe you can assist me with these...
What am I supposed to have done wrong?
Mr. Taylor, is this the only ball of string in the house?
It's the only one you found, it must be.
I'll continue looking if you don't mind.
We're making inquiries into an offence of murder that happened on the 17th of April 1986.
17th of April?
That's
Nothing
correct,
to do
sir.
with me.
Well, I've reason to believe that you may be able to assist us with our inquiries.
No.
What if we could come in and have a
No, you can't come in, you've got a warrant.
I haven't got a warrant, so I don't need a warrant to come in and talk to you.
Meanwhile, in London, detectives in the rape inquiry, Operation Heart, routinely interviewed one of their Z-men suspects. His name was John Duffy.
I'd like you to cast your mind back to Thursday, April the 17th of this year. Can you tell me where you were and who you were with on that day?
I can't think that far back. What Thursday of the month would that be?
That would have been the 3rd Thursday.
No idea.
It's the 17th of April, especially. There were a number of reasons why Andy and I didn't like Duffy. He came in with a solicitor, and he was the first person to refuse body samples, which was a bit unusual. Also, he looked remarkably like one of the photo fits we had, especially the profile one. And also, he was very glib in his answers, and trying to be much too helpful. Have you ever been to the Guildford area?
Where's the Guildford area?
It's in Surrey.
Nah.
So we decided then to take a closer look at him. There were a lot of things against him, really, because he was ginger-haired, whereas our man that we were looking for, we thought from our witnesses, was a fair-haired man. Also, he'd got no previous convictions for indecency other than a serious assault on his wife, of which he was on bail for at that stage. But on the other side of it, I respected Cody and Kelly's feelings about it.
We then heard from Hampstead Police Station that about 3 or 4 hours after we had interviewed him, he'd gone in there complaining that he'd been assaulted and mugged in the street and had lost his memory. We subsequently found out that he had been admitted to Fry and Barnet Mental Hospital, still suffering from amnesia.
So we went down to the hospital to see what the situation was, and we were unable to satisfy ourselves that he was suffering from amnesia or indeed that he wasn't suffering from amnesia. And it wasn't practical to interview him under those circumstances. Duffy, at this stage of the investigation, was a good suspect, but there were other suspects in the inquiry which we thought at that stage could be better.
Police believe that Anne Locke, whose body was found yesterday, may have been killed by the man responsible for 2 other murders and a number of rapes.
It was 10 weeks since she'd disappeared, and her killing bore many of the now familiar hallmarks.
When Anne Locke's body was found, it was decided that this was our man. He had struck again. What little evidence pointed strongly to this fact. This meant that the incident room that I was running had to take over the Hertfordshire police investigation, and we had to reinvestigate the whole matter from scratch. We had an awful lot of information come into the inquiry office, and a lot of it was anonymous, but all inquiries had to be followed up. And of course we had some people wanting to confess to the murders. And in point of fact, we had one chap ring up and said that his son had confessed to him that he had, in point of fact, thrown Anne Locke off of the train. Well, we knew at that stage, really, that that didn't occur, because from the position of her body, there was no way that she was thrown off of the train. But, of course, like all of these inquiries, we had to follow it up. This meant myself travelling down to the West Country and interviewing the man down there. And it would appear, basically, that the father really wanted to get the son out of his house, and the story about the confession was just not true.
We were always concerned that this man would strike again, so we decided to take the attack to him. We mounted a surveillance operation each weekend at unmanned railway stations by busing hundreds of police officers, like the British Transport Police, to these southeast regional stations where we felt passengers were at risk.
Steve to Chris, the train's now arriving.
Yeah, received. Anybody getting off?
Yeah, there are 4 people getting off.
Yeah, received.
And everything was going fine until one Sunday, a Sunday newspaper decided to reveal the surveillance operation. Now, that was a shame, because you never ever know with an operation of this magnitude when it's going to pay off. It can pay off at any moment, any day. And there we are. We've had this exposed by a newspaper, and we have wasted a lot of the public's money.
Meanwhile, at Guildford, Surrey police turned to a psychologist who'd already offered suggestions to Operation Heart. By piecing together circumstantial evidence in a scientific way, two detectives and Professor David Cantor began to build a profile of the wanted man.
People do change, but the changes that happen to them often are part of things going on in their lives.
Professor Cantor turned out to produce some remarkable insights.
See, from studies that we'd done of other incidents like fires, we knew you can build up a picture of a person and get some understanding of them without actually meeting them. And we felt that there probably was material the police had that a psychologist could do something with. But this was the first time we'd ever done anything like this, and we really didn't know what the police had available to them. And I'm sure they didn't really have any clear understanding of what we might make available to them. So it was a learning experience for both of us. We had information about the sequences of the attacks and the patterning over time. And what we did was to systematise that and to try and produce neat tables that would throw up any patterns that were in there. And when we looked at it more closely, it did seem one might be able to identify some sort of centre of gravity to these crimes that would indicate an area in which he might live. And it turned out to be quite accurate, that he did indeed live in an area really not very far from Finchley Road.
In fact, Professor Cantor gave police a list of 17 predictions about the killer. Among them, not just an idea of where he lived, but his physical description, his friends, and the nature of his work.
By looking at the evolution, we began to get a feeling of a person who had the characteristics of rapists who are attacking because of the nature of their relationships with women that already exist. And this suggested that perhaps he'd had some sort of permanent relationship. But because of the nature of the attacks and many of the details of the way these were carried out, we had the feeling that this was really going to be a very turbulent relationship and unlikely to have been the sort of relationship in which he actually would have had any children.
2 months later, a police dispatch rider brought confidential records analysing previous crimes that might be linked. It was a regular routine, but this time one crime caught John Hurst's eye.
This particular crime, which was a rape at the Copse Hall in North London in 1985, was in so many cases similar to the evidence that was before me in relation to Tamboezer, that I really felt that if we could find the person who committed that particular rape, we would seriously want to talk to him about the murder of Maartje Tamboezer.
Still in London, a violent rape in broad daylight.
In fact, it was a case that had featured in an earlier Crimewatch UK.
It happened at the back of the Copthall Sports Centre swimming pool in Mill Hill on Wednesday the 20th of November. A witness remembers a young man with a dog hanging round the footpath that leads to Pursley Road. You may recognise him. He's only 5'3" tall, about 25 years old, with light ginger hair and pockmarked skin.
If this was the killer, there was at last a good description. A team from the Surrey Inquiry moved up to London.
What we're going to do is then concentrate on the 3 miles, and we'll be looking at vets, local intelligence officers and dog walking areas where a man of this description can be found. There's a suggestion it could be a jockey, so we need to look at riding establishments as well. The other important thing is I don't want to waste any time in coming backwards and forwards to Surrey each day. I want you to start up in London because I'm convinced that the answer lies up there somewhere.
This is an artist's impression of the man who we're looking for. He had with him a dog called Bruce. I wonder if you can have a look through your records and see if you've got anything with that name and that description. So a dog like that, please.
Yeah, I don't recognise the dog at all, but I can have a look for you.
Thank you.
No, the only dog called Bruce we've got is an Alsatian. Doesn't look anything like that, I'm afraid.
We're looking for a small man. Have you seen anybody like that round here looking for work?
No, no one like that.
OK, thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Welcome.
Cheers.
Right, OK, thanks a lot, cheers.
One of my DCs went to the local intelligence office at West Hendon Police Station, where he obtained a description of a man who fitted the description of the person responsible for the Copthall rape. His name was John Duffy, and he was in their records because of an assault on his wife. And because of his description, I felt he was the best suspect we'd had at this stage.
Can you just check a couple of dates against his sickness register?
Sure.
The 19th of August, 85.
It's an annual leave day.
When you get a suspect with a description that fits, the first priority is to gather as much background information on them as possible to see if they can be easily eliminated. So I got my research team to check out his work record, get details of his blood and find out where he was.
In fact, he was still a patient at Fry and Barnet Psychiatric Hospital. But what they didn't know was that he was free to come and go.
I was sure that it was the same man who'd struck again. And of course, the description of the attacker was the same as the man Duffy, who we were looking at for the Copthall.
Well, as you know, he fits the description. He's on bail for a serious assault on his ex-wife. We know he's got an interest in martial arts, and he's also been seen by officers from Operation Heart, and in fact he's one of their Z-men.
What about his blood? I mean, you were looking at his blood.
Well, you know that he's an A secretor. Well, we've checked the PGM and it's right for the Copthall attack and Maartje Tamboezer and a possible for the girl at Watford.
Are we certain about the blood?
Positive, yeah. Personally checked with the laboratory. And incidentally, he lives within the area predicted by Professor Cantor in the profile.
Clearly, we would only get one chance, and one chance only, to do the job properly and interview him at some length. Otherwise, the thing would fail. And I did not want to just go and arrest him as a suspect without having a look at his mode of living. And with that, I decided to have a 12-man surveillance team look at him for the next two or 3 weeks.
Stand by, stand by. Target out of the premises is in Barlow Road, towards you, 8-4. I'm inside the main hospital. The eyeball on the target is towards the main entrance on foot.
We knew that, of course, he'd been a patient in Fry and Barnet Hospital, and when we actually started work on him, he was an outpatient attending there, I think, 2 or 3 days a week or more. But that didn't prevent him from doing really what he wanted.
62 TK main gate. I've got the eyeball, The train is at the platform. The target is now onto the train. Footmen are onto the train, which is off, southbound.
Each day I would hear from the surveillance team as to what occurred, whether anything suspicious or unusual had happened. And after about 2 weeks, it became clear that Duffy had probably realised he was under surveillance. That prompted us to see whether or not
any crime had been committed because I was very, very worried. What was very interesting, the following morning when the surveillance team picked him up, he had shaved off his moustache. That then really did worry me, because I then began to realise that he could go out and commit another crime, and we had him under surveillance. So I decided that we must arrest him.
You John Duffy? Yeah. Police officers from Surrey, being arrested for murder. Take a seat down there, John.
A man is being questioned by police in Surrey tonight about the murder of Anne Locke, the 29-year-old television secretary who disappeared last May and whose body was found 2 months later beside a railway line. It's understood that the man, who hasn't been named, is also being questioned about 2 other murders.
Right, Mr. Duffy, fingerprints and photograph, please.
Once Duffy had been arrested, it was a race against time, because we had to obtain as much hard evidence against him as we could, bearing in mind we only have 36 hours in which to establish hard evidence before going before a magistrate as to whether he should be further detained.
Found that lock in the bedroom.
Okay.
You hold at the ends, about there. Look into the lens.
What's that, John? I don't know what it's used for. I found it in the street, and I thought it might make a nice little novel pocket knife, you know? Use it for odds and ends and that.
All right. Now have a look at that. What's inside it?
Bit of blue paper.
And what's the purpose of that?
But I couldn't say at the moment. I don't know how long I've had them.
In many of the rapes, and in the murder of Maartje Tamboezer, partially burnt tissues and swan vesta matches were found at the scene, which were the offender's attempt to destroy forensic evidence.
John Duffy had been forensically examined by a doctor following the serious assault on his wife, and he clearly knew what the police would be looking for in respect of any forensic evidence.
But of course there was no chance of ever really destroying the evidence, and then with respect to his ex-wife, the evidence grew.
I was working at a laundrette with this woman and this girl, and I used to come home and there'd be like loads of videos on the floor. It was always violent and blood videos and never anything nice, you know.
Were they martial art type videos?
Yeah, they were always violent and always blood, and I just didn't want to watch anything like that. I didn't want to watch it. At that time, I wasn't really interested in sex, just didn't want him to touch me. And then he'd suddenly get his dressing gown robe and he'd tie my hands up, like with one hand and really quickly, and he forced me to have sex with him. And the more I resisted, the more he seemed to enjoy it. And if I just let him do it, he just seemed to lose interest altogether. And one day he just suddenly said that he'd raped a girl. I mean, I didn't believe him. I mean, you wouldn't, would you? And he said that it was my fault because I was so cold. And then he got this personal stereo and he said that it belonged to her and that she'd enjoyed doing it. And I just didn't believe him.
What would you say, John, if your wife was to give evidence to say that one day you came home and said to her, "I've raped a woman tonight and it's all your fault"?
I've no further comments.
This is your wife. Not me, your wife. She's going to say that you came home one day and said, I've raped a woman and it's all your fault.
If it was a searching question, then he would become very intense and stare at you. And you really have to, with him, make your mind up that this man is not going to intimidate me. And my immediate thoughts were, well, I must feel very, very sorry for those victims of his crimes, because many of them have described the way that he looked at them and stared at them, and it's very, very off-putting, I should think, for a young lady to be confronted by him.
Well, at first, I was 100% sure that I didn't want to go through with it. But this wasn't going to beat me.
You have been asked here today to see if you can pick out the person whom you saw on Wednesday the 20th of November 1985 and who assaulted you.
And as I walked into the room, I saw him, and to me everybody else was a blur. His face was the only face I could see in that room.
Do you understand?
Yes. It's number 4.
Thank you very much.
Afterwards, I had no doubts at all that he was my attacker. But I felt relieved, and everybody told me how brave I'd been. I think I knew then that I'd done the right thing in reporting it, just so that, you know, it would never happen to anybody else.
Is the person here?
Yes, it's number 4.
Yes, I think it's number 4.
Mr. Duffy, are you happy with your position, or would you like to change positions? Is the person here?
No.
It's number 5.
Would you say that louder, please?
It's number 5.
Thank you very much.
We'd had something like 27 victims which we thought Mr. Duffy had committed offences against. So we tried to get as many of those there that we could. But there were some that were too frightened to come, others just refused to come, and there were a lot of them abroad as well, because we'd had au pair girls over here that had been assaulted by him. So we had the ID parades, and 5 girls did pick him out.
When we went to Duffy's parents' house, which was extremely difficult for them, although they were 100% friendly and cooperative, when we searched the house, it was there that we found the crucial evidence in the Tamboezer case.
Peter?
That somyarn is very unusual indeed, found in your mother's house, that you use regularly. The same somyarn, and surprise, surprise, the laboratory say at 12:30 today, it's the same string that was used in the murder of Maartje Tamboezer. No ifs, no buts, could be's, possibles, the same. What have you got to say about it?
I'm saying I have no memory.
You're not saying you did murder her? You're not saying you didn't?
That's right.
At no stage did he ever deny being responsible for the offences. He certainly gave no impression that he was disputing anything at all. He just didn't say he did them, didn't say he didn't do them.
The evidence for the Tamboezer murder seemed overwhelming, as it was for 5 of the London rapes. But the other 2 murder cases were more difficult to prove.
In the Anne Locke case, there was no forensic evidence. We were relying on the evidence of the other 2 murders to convict John Duffy of Anne Locke's murder. But although we charged him, because we felt it was in the public interest, we often felt that we would lose that part of the case against John Duffy.
In the Alison Day case, the only hard evidence they could hope for would have to come from the forensic laboratory.
We had about 70 items of clothing from Duffy, over half of which were made of fabrics which were not suitable for shedding fibres. But we were able to take about 30 samples and compare the fibres with those that we had from Alison Day's clothing. That's about 2,000 individual fibres.
It's a long and tedious task for the scientist to find comparisons with fibre evidence, and often with no good result. But I realised that the evidence in the Alison Day case was weak, and I thought, we'll ask for the fibre evidence to give us strength to the case if it does turn up. And I thank my lucky stars that I did, because just a few weeks before the trial, the results came through, and we found that we had 13 separate identifications of fibres found in Alison Day from clothing of Duffy. Those fibres were the single most significant piece of evidence in the Alison Day inquiry. In fact, it was virtually a fingerprint.
We were accumulating daily strong evidence against Duffy, and I had no doubt in my mind that he was guilty of these offences. Nevertheless, one of the things that really bugged me was the question of his loss of memory or amnesia. Then came a great breakthrough from the Romford incident room. An associate of Duffy's came forward and told us a story that completely destroyed Duffy's amnesia claim.
John told me he'd witnessed something really bad and that 2 mercenaries were trying to frame him with the police. He said we had to fake that he'd been beaten up and lost his memory. He even wanted me to slash him with a razor. He kept on and on at me to help him. And he was so insistent, he scared me. John was such a good friend and meant so much to me. In the end, I felt I had to help him. As we separated, John said he was trusting me not to tell anyone. Later, John told me I could get done for aiding and abetting, which could result in life imprisonment for both of us if I told anyone and we got found out.
Well, there must be something you want to say about it, John.